Welcome to Office Hours, where we answer your questions 7 days a week, 5 days on YouTube, and 2 days, still on YouTube, but not recorded on Saturday and Sunday. So if you've got questions, go ahead and throw those in. Today is our audio day, and we've got a great audio panel here. So if you've got audio questions, this is a great day to ask them right now inside of Makana. If you're not inside of Makana, you can, of course, ask the questions at askofficehours.global. That's askofficehours.global. And we will file those in as they roll in. Try to make sure that those questions are well formed and technical. And so if you ask those, people will bring them in. People will vote on them inside of Makana, and we'll get to them as fast as we can. Let's go ahead and jump into those questions. Bill, what do we have?
First one comes this morning from old friend Bo Cordell in Charleston, South Carolina. And Bo wonders, what's the best Windows software solution for NoiseAssist-like noise reduction for live audio?
Go ahead, Courtney.
Well, there's a lot of it depends going on there. You could use Cedar, but I don't know if Cedar was more designed as a tool for noise removal off of file-based stuff, so not necessarily live. But I think they do have a live version of it now. For freebies, if you happen to have a NVIDIA card, and as a 2040, I think is the minimum on it, their broadcast application, which has some really potent AI-based noise removal, but you do have to have an NVIDIA RTX graphics card in there because it uses the GPU to do the noise removal and apply AI to it. And it is quite good. I've heard samples of it. I'm not using it now. And of course, Zoom's noise removal is removing my air conditioner right now because I have personalized audio on. Here, I'll turn it off. And let's see, maybe I'll turn it off. Oh, maybe I won't. Okay, sorry. You can't click it anymore and turn it off.
Go ahead, Bill.
Well, I was just going to say, my first experience with big-time noise reduction was with Cedar, and we had a shoot with a bunch of people in an empty office building, and the sound in there was terrible. We could all hear so many of the AC, the HVAC things working, and I'll never forget the moment that the soundy who we had hired, who had Cedar on their remote kit, turned it on, and everything just collapsed. And it was like one of those moments where this is the future. I'm going to be able to do so much. And I'm just really kind of impressed with how far noise reduction has now crossed the landscape. It seems like everybody understands these algorithms, and it's in so many tools, even the little websites, and really making the world a lot quieter. So whoever did the original research on it, just thank you. It's made remote recording just hugely easier.
Yeah, I think that and on the Windows side, there's also Clarity. I think Clarity.ai or IO is another one that's on both Mac and PC, I believe. And then you have the NVIDIA one. The NVIDIA one's probably the best on the PC side of things. In my opinion, still the best noise reduction that we've used so far has been the Sound Devices Noise Assist inside of their app. So what I would do is take my Mix Pre and then I'd plug it into a PC. And then I would use that instead. And here's the thing is that they all are removing the noise at this point. I mean, air conditioning, everything else. What you're probably getting less of, what the Sound Devices version does better is leave some of the high end still there. So I think that a lot of times everything sounds a little bit muffled when everything's been removed, and so some of the high end is taken out. And so I think that's what I think they do better than everybody else. The ability to remove the background is something that I think a lot of folks can do now. It's the kind of the higher end part of the voice that I don't think that most do very well. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, I now have it where I can switch it on and off. It is personalized audio is on now, and now it's off. And there's a pretty noisy air conditioner running about 3 feet right behind me. It's
funny. It sounds a little bit more room. It has a kind of a weird room echo. I don't really hear a lot of hiss. I just hear maybe something else.
It's off at the moment. Yeah.
Maybe if you turn on original audio, it might be to turn it all off. So we actually hear it. But yeah, it didn't sound that much different when you did that from our perspective. It does sound like.
So it's the personalized audio, turning that on and off doesn't necessarily. Well, let me see if I can just quickly go into audio settings here and turn off my personalized audio.
And while he's doing that, Jonas said Crisp.ai, which is the one I was actually thinking about. Sorry about that. Crisp.ai or the NVIDIA broadcaster are Jonas's suggestions. And then John Wallace also says plugins with SoundGrid work well. Guys at hardware. Yeah, there you go.
Okay,
Oh,
there's
man.
my there's my music, there's the original sound for musicians. So I guess the other way it does, if you don't have original sound for musicians turned on, Zoom will do background noise removal as a default if you don't have new. But then the personalized audio is better at removing instantaneous noise like clanging or voices or things that are not a continuous noise that happens behind you, which is, I think, it's
like you're at Niagara Falls now.
Yeah.
Well, let me turn it.
Well, and again,
Here. Oh,
go ahead.
sorry. Going back to
And again,
personalized audio.
The personalized audio Zoom does a great job at solving some of these things, but you do lose a lot of the upper resonance of your voice when that noise reduction goes in. So that's the thing that, like, my noise reduction is actually pretty high right now inside of the Mix Pre, and I think that a fair amount of my voice is still coming through. So I think that's the
when you
that's
went
the
back
issue.
to that microphone, Alex, from the Stellar, I think, are you rolling off any of the high end or anything? Because you
I'm
seem
not.
a little tubbier on this. Maybe it's just
This is
it's a
the-
better microphone and you're closer to it. So
Yeah, it is a little. It does
proximity,
have a little more bass,
a little
Yeah.
proximity sounding.
Yep. Yep, which I take advantage of.
Yes.
Next question.
Next question comes to us from Roscoe Jones in Madison, Indiana. Have you ever used one of these tiny tents to shade or protect a laptop or pan tilt zoom camera? And he's got a link there to Amazon.
Good, Bill.
Yes, I have. For me, back when I lived in Arizona, sun and laptop screens were always a challenge if you were doing any kind of remote monitoring in the field. So I used to have 2 or 3 pop-ups. They were made a little bit like camping tents, and you could unfold them, and they would cover the entire laptop screen. Back then, I think I was using a titanium MacBook Pro, and it would give you a little kind of viewing port into the screen. Way better than trying to read those early screens just outside. And I still have, I think, one of those in there. And occasionally, if I have to go out and do something on the beach or something like that here in San Diego, I'll take that along just to lock off the sun from hitting the screen. It's a better experience. You have some kind of shading.
Go, Jesse.
We take one of these on every shoot we go on, but not intentionally. We don't use a tent. We use this. It's basically like a laptop case that transforms into a tent. A bit more expensive than what you described, but it comes with us on every shoot because we're carrying our laptop in it anyway.
Good, Courtney.
Yeah, almost all productions in Hollywood that go out in the field these days have a DIT station. And if you're shooting out in the open sun, they have to shield those monitors from the sun. And they have these bigger than this one that was depicted in the link there. That's like a one-man tent, but big enough to put the DP and the DIT person puts their cart inside there, and they put some black duvetine over the opening so you can get in and out easily and still block all the light. And they have a little portable air conditioner like the one you're hearing behind me in there because it gets heinously hot in the summer inside those little tents if you don't have air conditioning. And so they sit inside the little tent all day and look at the 2 monitors. So that's very handy in almost all productions that have a digital imaging technician on the payroll has one of those tents and a portable air conditioner.
Next question.
Next question comes to us from John Preto in Las Vegas, Nevada. Has VizRT priced Vector out of the market at $1,260 US per month compared to other software and cloud solutions like Vmix, MIMO, ROS, and so forth?
I think they just have to decide on who your market is and what you're going to do with the market there. So if they have something that's significantly better or distinguishes itself, and we're just in the process of testing it right now, I think that there are people who will pay $1,260 a month for that, to have that just work. And so I think that it just depends on the kind of production folks are working on and what they're providing there. So, there's an advantage to that as well, is just that it actually makes your pool a little smaller. So it doesn't necessarily price you out of the whole market. It prices you out of part of the market. And sometimes that market is not the market that you want. So I think that it's just a matter of them figuring that out. I think that that's going to be a constantly moving target over the next couple of years. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next, and Douglas wonders what would be the panel recommendation for a mic arm that's a bit more durable than the Blue Compass, and he's got a Logitech link there for it.
Go, Jeff.
Douglas, I don't have a particular recommendation. I would tell you to stay away from cheap ones, even cheaper than that Logitech one. I've tried some terrible arms. Looking at B&H Rode, and the Elgato gets good marks, but what I've gone to is just a standard K&M boom stand, and that brings my mic right here from my desk, stays out of the way of my computer monitor. It doesn't have the ability to go up and down as easily, but once I got it into place, it stays there, and I just have a stage weight on the legs, so it stays put.
We have gotten a couple of the Elgato arms, and they work pretty well. They don't have quite the same linkages that this one does. I'm using an OC White Ultima, and it has a couple more linkages to it, and it's a little heavier than the Elgato, but it's 3 times more expensive. So that's that. But the Elgato we found to be pretty good as a low profile. I would never get a high profile arm again, because I have all these monitors and everything else. And so, having something, especially if I'm going to do anything on video, if you're going to do something on not on video, I spent my first 20 years using, maybe 20, 25 years using some kind of over the, high profile arm. But once I moved to low profile, it's hard to go back. So anyway, it's just your vision is so much better without it, and you don't bump it into things and so on and so forth. So, but I would look at the Elgato low profile. I think it's actually a pretty good arm. Next question.
Jonathan Daigle in Washington, D.C. says TWIT has been testing Restream. Despite Leo's assertion, to my ear, the audio sounds much flatter than the previous setup. For example, comparing MBW to Security Now, the difference is very noticeable. Why, and how could it be improved?
Courtney.
Well, it depends on whether you're comparing the playback version or the live stream between the two, and it's kind of hard to compare the two because they don't occur at the same time. It's a switch back and forth. It may be just that, Restream, all of them will encode MPEG 4, MP3, or AAC to between 64 and 328 kilobits per second. And so it depends on the setting that you're listening to, or the setting that your software, your playback software, your viewing software defaults to based on your bandwidth of the bit rate of your bandwidth is able to provide. So check your bandwidth. Maybe that's causing a noticeable difference, and I'm not sure what they're using now to encode the audio. Maybe Alex will.
Yeah, I think that the issue that they're having, they're trying to figure out how to simplify these. So I think that Leo's talked about it a little bit. So they're looking at ways to do the show more efficiently. Restream is one of the possibilities of making that actually happen. But I do think that it is not, it hasn't turned out as well yet. Obviously, I think that what everyone would prefer is double-ended recording from Zoom. Just saying. Anyway, so anyway, then go back to a regularly scheduled program. But I think that double-ended recording is the way to fix this for the post. You have to remember that 99% of TWIT's listeners are listening to it later, so they're not watching it live. There's hundreds of people watching it live. There's tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands watching it later. So it really, the double-ended recording would make a big difference. One of the challenges with that, if you do it in a video cycle, is that Riverside's not really built for video, and we definitely have tested Squadcast, and we know that it's not built for video. So it'll do video records, but if you try to do a live show with it, where you have multiple people, it will crash. So that's the challenge: is how do you do a live video feed with live audio and then record double-ended so that you have the highest quality later? And obviously, in a perfect world, you just end up with it live straight out of the gate, which is what MacBreak does. And again, the quality on Zoom is very high as long as everybody's on a wired connection and so on and so forth. But I think that the problem is Restream's trying to make up their own WebRTC. And the problem with making up your own WebRTC is that transversing complex networks is hard. And it turns out that it's not something that everybody can do. And it's not something that you can just buy off the shelf and have your WebRTC work. Everybody has failed at this except for Teams, Google. In my opinion, the big number, the WebExes and the Teams and Google Meet and Zoom, they all do it, but it took a lot of engineering to get that to work well. I'll argue that Zoom probably does it the best, but they all do it at a reasonable level. But all these little companies that are trying to roll their own WebRTC, it's a disaster. it has been a disaster for all of them. so it just doesn't work, and that's why a lot of folks are starting to incorporate, like for instance, the Zoom tools into what they're doing. So I think that's the hard part. Is I don't think Restream will in the long run probably be the right solution, but they're experimenting with it. Next question.
Alexander Knight at Port Coquitlam, BC. What's a good-sized teleprompter for eye contact?
Good, Courtney.
I wouldn't go any bigger than 15-inch. Smaller is okay, but if you're just using it for eye contact, the closer to the center of the lens, the eyes of the other person, if you're trying to do like an Interatron setup, is good. If you're using it as a teleprompter where they're reading text, you don't want to go too big because you'll see the eye travel across the lens as the people are reading, and you'll be able to tell that people are reading text because their eye travel left and right. So you want to keep it. You want to stay with a 4:3 monitor instead of a 16:9 monitor, because 16:9 widens the eye contact away from the center of the lens. That's my 2 cents. I think 15 inches is the sweet spot, 15 to 17 inch monitor, and try and keep the text or whatever you're having them look at in the center in front of the lens. A lot of times you can move that around in software, or you can bring your margins in to keep the text from going too wide. That's what we do. The trick we do is we change the margins if we see too much eye movement. Keep the text right in the middle. But if you start with a 4:3 monitor, that's best.
Good, Jesse.
And don't forget that the closer the camera is to the subject, the smaller the monitor should get. So if it's 2 feet away, you don't want to be doing 15 inches. You might want to be doing more like 8 inches. If it's 20 feet away, stretch bigger.
Yeah, most of it, the ones that we've done the most are 12, 15, and 24. 24 for something that's further away. So, and when we say further away, usually that monitor, when we're doing, because almost all the teleprompters I've owned, and I probably bought 20 or 30 in the last decade, almost all the teleprompters that we've used have been for eye-to-eye contact. So we almost never use the teleprompters for text. We do occasionally, but it's pretty rare. So the Interatron style process is what we do. And so the 24s became really popular because when they're more than about 10 to 15 feet away, it made it a really comfortable viewing, for them. As we got any closer than 10 feet, we tended to go down to the 15-inch ones, as was stated before. I haven't really gone down much lower than that. It does keep the eyes closer, but it's how comfortable is it for the person to see all the, I know this will sound crazy, but all the emotion that the other person has. The reason we're doing this is to get to elicit a response from the person on the other side. The largest teleprompter we made was a 60-inch teleprompter. It was a bit of a hard project, but it was great. Go ahead, Courtney.
Hey, might as well not use a teleprompter. Put a bunch of little small monitors around the lens. We got the eyes. So the big thing is that it was we set it up and they were so the person that the person was talking to, every person they talked to was life-sized. And what we carefully did was we lined the camera up with the eyes of the average eye height of every person that they'd be talking to. It was pretty awesome. That is absolutely the best way to achieve eye contact, is to make sure that camera lens is directly behind the eyeballs of the person that's pictured in the monitor. But you got a couple other things to consider when you go to a 21-inch, or in a static situation. If you're going to have it on a tripod, not operated, locked off, fine, no problem. But that teleprompter starts to get really big at 24 inches. The hood, because it's at a 45-degree angle on that glass, the top of it is like, 25 inches wide. And that blocks out a light when you get pretty close to somebody, or you're moving that camera through a set. It makes a big shadow that moves across the land. And so you have to take that into consideration. It's a big light blocking device that you're dealing with that can cast funny shaped shadows or shadows on the talent. And it makes it heavier. It's a lot heavier to mount that heavy monitor on the front. You're going to have a head that can counterbalance it so you don't upset the cameraman, to keep it perfectly balanced. So the bigger, the heavier, and the more light blocking.
Yeah, this is the test version of that big one that we built. So it wasn't something you necessarily put on a C stand. It was or on a tripod. It was more C stands and a little bit of And the person who came in to, when the guest came in to see it, you go, hey, what are we doing here? So it was very, very confusing. So next question.
Chuck Hodges in Tuolumne, California. With the numbers of the customer base for Zoom being overwhelmingly Windows PC based and many locked to PC only, often in PEG, what is the benefit to Mac only development and leaving these customers behind like is happening in the Liminal products?
I think that Andy, I think answered this fairly well yesterday. Is that what Liminal does, or what Liminal and Zoom do? They focus on what apps make the most sense on what platforms, and so they're writing custom code. Zoom does this, I think, more than anyone else, and I think it shows. Is that you write to the hardware. You write what is the hardware the best at, and we take full advantage of it rather than having lowest common denominator across a whole bunch of platforms. You take full advantage of what this platform does and take full advantage of what that platform does. And it does mean that you have to use different platforms for different outcomes. And there's some things like the general, Zoom itself and most of the core apps all work across it. But when you talk about these performance, you just simply can't get the same performance and can't get the same tools to work the same way across the multiple platforms. And so if you look at, the ZoomRoom, ZoomRoom Pro AV, which is in a beta right now, is of course leans towards Windows, but is cross-platform. Unreal Engine, of course, I guess you could do it on a Mac, but it's really a Windows solution. So the Unreal Engine solution is really a Windows solution. Of course, as I said, the broadcast, and then of course the third-party integrations are Mac and PC. So what you're talking about is a handful of things like Zoom ISO and Tiles and other things like that that lean into the Mac, because the Mac does those things better, but it doesn't do everything better, and the PC stuff is where the PC stuff goes. And so I think I personally love the way Zoom's doing this, or Liminal's doing this, because it's not, as a Mac user, our knees are often clipped out because people are trying to make it work on both platforms, and we just want it to work on our platform. So when Mac apps are out when a Mac or PC app is written to take full advantage of the hardware and not worried about trying to figure out how it's going to work on the other platform, you end up with higher performance every single time. You can talk about whether you like it or not, but you end up with a higher performance when you're not paying attention to other platforms. And I know that because I used to develop for multiple platforms, and then I stopped. I was like, I can't keep on developing for Windows and Mac because, well, Windows had all the tech support. It was like, it was 10% of my sales, 90% of my tech support. And so, but also because there was tons of features that I couldn't put in that were available on the Mac that I couldn't put into the PC side of. So we didn't put it in, and so then when we stopped doing that, we could do whatever we wanted. Yeah, go ahead, Courtney.
Well, I take an opposing point of view.
That's why you're here.
No, but I think
the many reasons why.
Yeah, I think one of the many problems is, and Alex is right. To find a software language that has a good cross-platform, so that you can just write the code once and then export a Mac version and compile a PC version. The user interfaces are different and the API calls are different. And so you have to find a language that supports both user interfaces. And it's easier with the Mac because they write the hardware and they write the software. So unlike on Windows, where you can have, 30 different video card manufacturers, or, even though they're using either NVIDIA or ATI as their GPU, or Intel as there's like 3 GPUs you have to write to or work with. But, Windows has gone to be able to solve that with DirectX 12, which is across all the video cards, and OpenGL. I mean, you can do a lot of stuff across all the different manufacturers of video cards hardware, and it looks great. I mean, just OpenGL works in any browser on Windows with any video card, and it's not that heavy lifting doing what Tiles is doing, which is just 2D mapping video into Windows and sizing them. That is pretty trivial in DirectX 12, so I'm not sure why they don't do it. They should hire a Windows team to write a Windows version. Now, it may not look exactly the same, and the controls may not look exactly the same and work exactly the same across, if you're going from using tiles on a Mac to using tiles on a window, you may have to look in a different place for things just and how the user interface works. But I don't think there's any difference performance-wise. NVIDIA, there's a reason that the high-end graphics cards and the gaming cards are all on Windows, because the NVIDIA has made a lot of inroads with their graphics engines that I don't think is available now on the Mac, because Mac now has their own hardware and they don't support other forms of video cards.
Yeah, but I think that I think that the Apple infrastructure is built around video in a way that Windows isn't, and the thing is, Windows is built for a lot of things, and graphics is just one piece of it. But the way that the integrated architecture from CPU and GPU sit down, it does operate differently if you talk to developers, as far as the efficiency of being able to hand those frames off and how it hands those frames off to the apps is a different thing if you rely completely on the operating system. If you're not trying to write anything to it, you're not trying to set anything on top of it. If you allow Apple to do the thing that it does, it's a very, very efficient platform to do that on. And again,
I agree. It's easier because you're just writing to one set of hardware.
Yeah. And so if you want to innovate, one of the things to do is reduce the number of variables. And when you add Windows and Android, I can tell you from personal development experience, you're adding massive numbers of variables. And most of them are based on people being cheap. So the thing is that there's all these cheap, we cut these corners and we fragmented our market and we have all this stuff. And so every time I do a development that might go cross-platform, I'm like, hey, let's develop it on the Mac first, or the Apple TV first, or the iOS first. We'll get it working so I can show the client that it's possible to do this. Because I know that what I do is then hand them I don't even develop for Windows and Android anymore. I just hand them, this worked on the Mac. Good luck. And then what they'll do is they'll take it to React Native, and then it dies. It'll just slowly bleed out, And so it just depends on it's so much easier to develop on the Apple platform for AV stuff than it is on Windows and Android. And I'm saying this from personal experience. It is just an entirely different world. And
yes, but easier to develop doesn't make it better.
No, I'm not saying it's better. I'm just saying that if you want,
you are.
But if you want to innovate, what you want to
innovate in a small market, yeah, sure.
A market that,
if you were to write only for the NVIDIA cards and limit your in the Windows side and only support the NVIDIA drivers, you could do a lot of neat stuff without having to support the rest of Windows.
The tiles market is going to be a small market. It's never going to be. You're not trying to solve the problems for 99% of the world. And what the people who want to use tiles or need to use tiles, what they'll do is they'll buy a Mac Mini as an appliance. It's a $500 appliance that does the thing, and it's not, it doesn't matter it's not going to sell any less because it's on a Mac, because the people who need that solve are just going to buy the appliance that's necessary to put it on the screen, and so, because right now, I have never seen anything run like that one does when it comes to that many video tiles, moving that smoothly, being able to have that interface and be able to run it. So if an event team says, oh, we don't want to use it because it's on Mac, well, good luck. Make that your, you have Unreal, so you can have more control over it over there. But the amount of fluid control over being able to put those tiles up there, a lot of people will just buy a Mac Mini to do it. And I don't think that it'll affect their sales at all. And eventually, it probably will migrate. Once you know what you want, then you can migrate it over. Anyway, next question.
TJ Asher in Minneapolis, Minnesota is up next. A host on a radio show I listened to recently had nasal surgery and now sounds very different than before. It's okay, but not as good as he used to sound. He was worried about sounding different. Have any of our voice talent ever faced a similar scenario?
Go ahead, Jeff.
So I assume when you say radio show that video is not a component here. So I would experiment with mic position and try maybe moving up more sort of out from the forehead rather than where we typically go below the mouth, and see if you get a change that you appreciate that gets less of the nasal quality.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, that's a good suggestion, Jeff. I know a lot of singers are very nervous because a lot of rock and roll singers and even opera singers will develop nodes on their vocal cords after a number of years, and they usually have to have surgery on their vocal cords to remove this. And a lot of singers have lost their singing voice as a result of that surgery. So it is a consideration if you're having any kind of laryngeal, vocal surgery done on removing your adenoids, let's say, or your tonsils. It changes the shape of your throat and the pathway that the sound travels from your vocal cords through your head. So, yes, I noticed I didn't have this melodious voice until after the age of 7 when I had my adenoids removed.
Go ahead, Bill.
So for me, now that I'm doing a lot more long-form work, I mean, I used to do a lot of radio and things like that. That was relatively short. But now in the audiobook world, it's amazing to me how different I sound during different sessions. Sometimes I just wake up more relaxed and my voice is deeper, and most of the time it's close enough so that I don't feel like there's a discontinuity between a chapter that I've ended the night before and a new chapter I'm starting the next day. But sometimes there is a significant difference. So I can certainly see why someone would feel they sound substantially different after surgery that's actually going to change your vocal chain through some form or another. All I can say is that I've had to go back and re-record chapters just because I felt there was too much difference between the way I sounded before. Voices are delicate things. They change over the course of time, and you just have to learn to deal with it. It's not an easy thing, and I'm sorry for your friend having to go through that. Some of this is purely psychological, too. You think I'm not able to, I might think I'm not able to do that this morning. Can I really do it if I push myself? Probably. But a lot of performance is in your head. And so you got to get out of your head and just try the best you can. And if you can't do it that day, come back to it another try and see if you can get better. And I'm hoping for your friend TJ that he finds a path back into what he loves doing.
I got Mickey.
Yeah, not necessarily the same situation, but I've had several instances wherein for narrative films with characters that are played by kids in their early teens, and a lot of them going through puberty, and oftentimes after principal photography, it would take months or even at times years to get the picture editorial done. And by the time they picture lock things and it goes to post sound and we go to ADR, the scenes that need to be ADR'd, some of these kids may have their voice sound totally different. So I've had productions come to us early in the process and say, okay, right after principal photography, we're going to prioritize the cuts of the scenes that need to be ADR'd with these characters so that we could throw them into the booth and get those lines as early as we can before their voices change too much.
Next question.
Next one comes to us from David Brady in New York City. And David says, with ZoomRooms Pro AV, trying to spec out a machine for use, Mac or PC, and how important is the GPU?
Yeah, I believe that the GPU is less important than the CPU in this way, and that is, what it's been seen running on so far are Mac Studios as well as HPZ4s. So those are things to look at there for your as far as in the cloud. G4DN4X large is what they're what has been used in the past so far for these Pro AV setups. I think that's what we're using actually or I think that we're working on that. So we've got a little bit of that in the cloud right now. So those are I think that we actually ran ours in, if I'm correct, we ran the Pro AV setup that we had at NAB on just a Mac Mini. To make that actually work, but it wasn't that many instances either. So a studio would probably be a safer place to go there. But that is cross-platform. so think about an HPZ4 or a Mac Studio is probably the best bet for stuff on-prem. Next question.
Our friend John Pedro in Las Vegas. I've purchased 3 Tricasters in my career, and each one crashed during production. How has VizRT improved the software's reliability?
I think that when you look at I think that our opinion about why, because we're seeing a lot of stability within Vector, is because it's basically an appliance. Nothing else is running on it. You don't have email running. You don't have anything else running. It doesn't have, it just takes over the computer. It says this is it. Also, it doesn't move anywhere, and it's in a very good environment, being a server farm. So it tends to, and we've noticed with a lot of software that the cloud tends to stabilize a lot of things that weren't necessarily stable on the ground, and that's because they're not as impacted by things like heat being moved, power, all these things that have some impact on the stability of our hardware gets taken out when you move it to a server farm. So, or most of it gets taken out. And so I think that's probably what's improving the reliability. I don't think it's anything to do with specifically the code, they may have, but I think that the big thing is the fact that it's in a much more pristine environment. Next question.
Guy Cochran in Seattle, Washington. In after hours, we used Zoom's screen share / request control to remotely control a Yamaha DM7 and also explore the Tiles app with NDI / alpha. How can we encourage more of this type of access to tools and or worldwide training in after hours?
I think I think for a lot of our viewers, it's probably a little inside baseball. So what I'd say is that, we're going to keep on looking at ways to do stuff in after hours, but we can probably talk about it in more detail on Sundays. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael up next. Has anyone ever used the Radial Catapult analog audio over Cat5 snakes? What has your experience been, and when would you need the transformer isolated version? He's got a link there.
I go, Jeff.
Not use the particular radial model, but there are several of these out there, and they're literally using the twisted pair in Cat5, Cat6 cable as 4 pairs to send line level or mic level analog audio. So there's no conversion. This is not a Dante snake. This is just pure wire from place to place with connectors on either end. If you're going to use microphones, you're going to need to use a shielded cable. So that you can get phantom power through there, because you need the shield for phantom power, and you are using a single shield for all 4 pairs, so there is a possibility of additional crosstalk between the pairs. I'm going to point you to, I'll put it in the chat, Dave Ratt, who is a live sound engineer, does some wonderful YouTube videos in Dave Ratt's style, where he takes 100 meters of this snake and 100 meters of mic cable and standard twisted pair shielded microphone cable, and compares the audio coming through both of those, does a null test on those. He also does that with I think 6 miles of mic cable in a different one, so you can see
what's the cliff notes on it. Was it better, worse, same?
For line level audio at 100 meters, no big deal.
Right.
You totally use it. Would I run microphones through this? Not something that I'm really precise about. But I don't want to run microphone level 100 meters anyways. I want to get my preamps right up next to the microphone. Yeah,
I tend not to want to run my microphone more than about 6 feet.
Don't run unbalanced. Don't run instrument through this. And these are passive. I don't know. I didn't see a transformer isolated version immediately on their website, but I'm sure they do have one, knowing Radial. Maybe Mickey knows more.
Yeah, go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, I've used the Catapult specifically. Some people like the one from Dave Ratt, the Rat Sound. You just going back to what you were mentioning earlier, Jeff. You do need shielded cable there, because it uses that as the common ground for all 4 audio feeds, bounce audio feeds. They work pretty good. I've used them as sub snakes. You want the transformer isolated version if you will be splitting them off. Like, say, if you have a single set of microphones and you need to send one copy of it to say your front of house, and another copy to the to your monitor world. That's when you might want to have isolation there, so that any possible electrical noise does not cross between the 2 systems. Same deal, like if you're splitting off to a recording desk or something like that.
Good, Courtney.
And you don't want to mix mic and line level or speaker level audio in the same Cat5. because if you want to use these, for example, for a boom person's cable, so that he's got a microphone and the headphone returns to drive his headphones back from your mixing panel, you don't want to have both of those because it can generate crosstalk, even though the signal is the same. Coming in and going out, you'll hear little artifacts in there as the sound crosstalks. The twisted pair helps eliminate some of that, but I used to design snakes for boom operators, and this was a big problem in putting both the mic level signal and the headphone level signal in the same cable is problematic. And the way we solved it is to have just a Siamese cable with each one running in a separate shielded, under its own shield, was not sharing a ground, and both of them are separate.
I'll go next question.
Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas has this one. The demand for premium co-working spaces in the Austin area continues to grow, as does its ranking as one of the top hybrid work hubs. How will co-working provide service to the video audio production sector?
Go ahead, Jesse.
High-speed internet, very unlimited bandwidth, rooms that are acoustically treated, so you could do some ADR re-recording if you needed to in them. And I think the biggest sales point of a co-working space is the networking opportunities, so, a large population of users.
Go ahead, Bill.
I'm not sure that here's my problem with that. The commercial real estate is still in an uproar. There's so many floors of so many buildings that are empty. And I think that this is one way real estate people are thinking, well, let's put something in this that's not terribly expensive to build out. And a co-working space could fit that category. So I suspect we will get a lot of these kind of things in some of the empty space out there. And that may turn it into a very difficult to compete in industry. I mean, 3 or 4 in a decent-sized metro area probably could be supported. If it turns out to be 30 or 40, just because it's not that big a deal to flip a commercial space into a co-working space, quote unquote, it may go too far too fast. So I'd just be cautious and look for those competitive deals if you need that service.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, the problem with a lot of these co-working spaces is they're kind of an open architecture where there's not a lot of isolation between different workers. You can choose where you want to plug your laptop in. You have a monitor and so on. But for video audio production, where sound isolation is important, you don't want to be hearing your neighbor if you're doing a podcast. You don't want to hear them talking on their podcast at the same time. So you need sound isolation between each worker, and that gets very expensive in a co-working type of hybrid work hub situation. I know, for example, that they built this giant building over by where my equipment's stored, and it was a 3-story tall open architecture building, with a common workspace, and they put it for lease. It was adjacent to one of the major studios here, and it sat empty for 4 years until they finally gave up on selling it as an open architecture type thing, and they went in and put walls and cubicles and isolated each and built individual offices into it. And then they were able to rent it out to a big post-production company because they didn't want to. Nobody could work in a production situation doing audio and video with noise contamination from one worker to the next.
Go ahead, Jesse.
I think I have a little bit more optimism than Bill and Courtney right now, and that's because we work with a lot of freelancers who are at the starting end of their career, and they all hit a point where they need more than their home office, but aren't ready to move into their own dedicated office. So I do think there's a market. I don't think it's a huge market, but I do think that there is a lot of churn from very entry-level freelancer to small business that might find this useful. A big part of that, though, is networking, and it doesn't do much good to network within your already existing network. It would have to be a bigger ecosystem for a shared space. But there's a bit of optimism on my side.
I think that there's a lot of opportunity. We actually had some conversations with WeWork before COVID where we were looking at studios. And so we had a couple conversations back and forth. And the concept there was the first concept was really to build a studio, a small studio that was available to people who were at WeWork so they could rent a production studio to do their training videos, to do some little live streams and so on and so forth. And we would equip those and be able to actually remotely run them for them. And so the idea was that you'd have one person, a tech person there that would show up if it was booked, to make sure that everything was ready to go. But you'd pay an extra $400 or $500 to do your thing, or $300 or $400 to do this event that you want to do, which would be very inexpensive for an average person. And the tools have even gotten much easier now to do those kinds of things. And so the idea is to put those into WeWork so that people can, and they're just an added value and to that process. I think they ended up using Cheddar, where they just did shows by Cheddar out of WeWork, which was a complete disaster. And so the other thing is that I think we made the argument before COVID that didn't make as much sense before COVID that I think might make sense more for these shared working areas, is to just have a higher cost per square foot room that is much more isolated and much more built for virtual meetings. So the idea is that in many of these co-working spaces, you can just share a desk, or you can just walk up and there's a place to do it, and you get a basic membership, or you can pay a little bit more and have an actual office. But the idea is you pay a little bit more, and that actual office starts to become isolated, and it may not be perfectly floated, but it'll be much more isolated. And you only can do that when you're building them from scratch. You can't go back you can go back and retrofit them, but it was never going to make sense. And so we were talking to them about those kinds of things as well, where you really build the rooms out for it. I still think that there's an argument for that, but we haven't seen it happen yet. Next question.
Gabriela Seychelles-Mistera in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan. Somebody said that the new Blackmagic Design 2110 devices may not match other industry standards outside of Blackmagic. New Blackmagic Design Presenter Station mostly duplicates things that already exist but run on popular standards like NDI, H.264, HEVC, and DanteAV. Is this really a good idea?
Does the Presenter Station run on DanteAV? I don't think anything Blackmagic does uses Dante, because they would have to pay for a license, and I think that I don't think that's Blackmagic's MO. so I don't think that they use DanteAV. I think that the bottom line is that one of the big things that's been holding up 2110 is the concept that it has to be uncompressed all the time. And I think, and there's nothing, Blackmagic's not outside of the industry standard. They're inside of the 2110 spec. It's just that they're incorporating a compressed version, which is part of the 2110 spec. So they haven't stepped outside of it. They've just moved forward with something else there. And again, I think I mentioned this in past shows. I talked to people in the standards division, and they were excited about it. They were excited that something was going to happen and start moving forward. So I don't think that there was necessarily as much resistance as people think. Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, I read the question that the Blackmagic is not using any of those standards, and there are devices that do that.
Oh, I got it. I misread it.
Is that a bad idea for Blackmagic to not use those popular standards?
When you build an entire ecosystem, you don't really need to worry about other people's standards. The thing is that when you're building all the ins and outs of a system, it could be argued that it's to your advantage to not necessarily support all the other ones, but almost all the ones that you're seeing there require licensing. So when you look at NDI, H.264, HEVC, DanteAV, yeah, those are things that other people are using, and it would cost Blackmagic more and potentially us more if they did those. And they're like, well, we can say that that's a bad idea, except that they're making a lot of money doing it. You go to NAB and you'll see the size of their booth and the size of everybody else's booth. They're practically half of the South Hall now. So the business model seems to be working. Not supporting other people's standards is a horrible idea if you're small. Once you get to a certain size, not supporting them turns out to be a pretty good business model. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, I think 2110 is an extensible standard, so maybe Blackmagic is of course taking advantage of the extension. And once you install the infrastructure that supports the maximum speed of 2110, then you can play around within that to use different protocols and write your own protocol that operates within that hardware infrastructure. So it's not as much of a problem. You just have to make sure that all your software packages agree on the same protocol and define it. And then you can just connect to the same hardware interconnects and just make sure that your protocol on the software side supports whatever flavor you've decided to support.
Next question.
Idris Haggy in Fairfax, Virginia is up next. What shotgun mic would you recommend for recording with the USB-C based iPhones and or iPads? And what would you think of the new iOS Final Cut Cam from Apple?
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, so iOS devices support class-compliant USB audio interfaces. So any class-compliant audio interface will work, and you can plug a regular XLR-based shotgun mic into it. The Mix Pre is popular for field work and also popular with this community. So that's probably an audio interface to consider. You might also want to look into maybe the Shure MVX2U, which is a very small interface, a couple of centimeters tall. Has an XLR connector right on it and a USB-C port on the other end. So those could come in handy. Popular microphones to use for camera top mics. This one's a Sennheiser 416, the same one that Bill Davis is speaking into right now. There's its slightly bigger brother, I guess, the MKH60 from Sennheiser as well, Sennheiser MKH60. If you want something a bit more cost-effective, but still pretty darn good sounding, this is the Rode NTG3. It's, I think, about 600 or 700 US. There are other microphones that we also use for camera top mics. This is the Deity S-Mic 3. I have a bunch of the previous model, the S-Mic 2. I think we have like 20 of them that we've used on camera as camera mics for like large multi-camera shows. If you want something slightly smaller, there's the S-Mic 3S, which is a shorter version of it. And just so you know, like the S-Mic product line was sort of designed to imitate the visual aesthetic as well as the sound reproduction of the Sennheiser 416. If you want something a bit more self-contained and smaller, there's the Rode VideoMic NTG, which has both analog and also digital outputs, so you can plug it into analog inputs or use a USB-C cable and plug it directly into an iOS device.
Go ahead, Bill.
So Mickey's covered all that. I'm not even going to talk about the audio because that was a brilliant look at all the options. I'm going to talk about the iOS Final Cut Cam. It is version 1. It is pretty amazing. Everybody's pretty excited about it because of what they're managing to do in the new Apple ecosystem in terms of multicam on an iOS device with an iPad and phones. It is also barely released version 1, and I always go back to remembering what my very first iPod was like and how that developed over the course of the 5 or 7 years after that to become from something that was category defining, but big and clunky and not difficult to work with, but we all had to learn something new, to a standard that everything followed afterwards. And I think that we're going to see somewhat the same thing with video production on mobile devices, that the research and the development that Apple is putting into this, particularly for younger users, will mean that they're going to be getting used to this mobile production tool set in a way that could change the way they think about content creation over the course of time. But no one knows. We're just going to have to see how it develops, but it's very early days for that.
Yeah, I think the Final Cut Cam is great if you're doing multicam. If you're not doing it, the Blackmagic camera is probably the best camera on the iPhone right now. And Apple even used it for one of their keynotes. I don't know if they're still using it there. Keynote is a little bit less complicated than the Blackmagic camera. So it's another one to take a look at there. If you're looking for something live, of course, Shoot, which is Michael Forrest's, is another. Squares TV is another one. It lets you do some telestration and it's a live camera opportunity there as well. But the Blackmagic one is free and it captures. I'm using that anytime it matters for things that are non-spatial. I'm shooting more and more spatial stuff with my phone, so I pay more attention to that as well. But I think it's going to be an interesting time. I highly recommend, if you can afford to put a Mix Pre 3 underneath your camera, underneath your phone, attach it to the rig. It's a great solution. I've used it quite a bit. Next question.
John Snyder's in from Reno, Nevada this time. What are your best tips and tricks for getting started with an Apollo Solo as a mic interface for meetings in Zoom? Would you use it directly as the input source, or would you create a virtual source using a tool like Audio Hijack?
Jeff?
So you say you're getting started. This is the Apollo Solo, little 2-channel interface with mic preamps built into it. And if you're getting started, I would keep it simple and go directly and use that as my sound source. Just plug your mic into it. Most important things, probably a high-pass filter, which is built into the mic input. That's the second switch there on the front, and then setting your gain stage appropriately so that you are not clipping and that you have enough level to go into the Zoom meeting. But getting started, keep it extremely simple. Now, the Apollo series does have the ability to have effects right inside it, so you can move on beyond and do some processing later on, but get yourself set up. Don't complicate things with audio hijack routing to begin with.
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, I would first dive into the console application and open up your I/O matrix there. You would be able to see there what specific channels are routed to your USB ins and your USB outs. So, and because it's such a flexible interface, you have so many possible sources, not only your actual physical audio, analog audio inputs, and also digital inputs, but also say there are what they call virtual channels within the Apollo line. So you can send sources from your computer into those virtual channels in console and mix them with other sources if you need to, route them out to back into your computer if you need to after they've been mixed, or send them out to your analog output. So take a look at that I/O matrix within the console application. Those virtual channels could be very, very useful. You can send different sources from your computer into various different virtual channels, and you can say, for example, in office hours, I've helped Bill set his Apollo up so that when he's on the show, he has Zoom coming in on a specific fader on his console, and Unity Intercom goes through another fader on his console. Bill is able to balance that however he wants. He might want to have, comms louder than Zoom so that he can clearly hear if someone's cueing him on comms. So yeah, take a look at that I/O matrix and also the virtual channels.
Go ahead, Bill.
As Mickey notes, you are hearing me through the Sennheiser 416 running directly into an Apollo Solo, and I'm gonna say thank you and yes to everything Mickey said, because what surprised me about the Apollo Solo, I bought it in part because I thought it was a simple thing. You've got one knob. You got 4 buttons. And I thought, how complicated is this going to be? Turns out that the circuitry inside this thing is very complex, and there's a lot going on in there. So Mickey and I had to spend 2 or 3 sessions getting the routing patched in to do things like this second channel feedback and things like that. It can be really difficult, or it can be simple. Also, the Universal Audio Apollo Solo allows for plugins like the CVOX that I'm using right now that has noise reduction built into it through an actual licensed Cedar system. So the fact that I'm not really noisy is probably in large part due to that, with the air conditioning still on in my office. So it's a great system, but it is not as simple as it might look from the outside. So spend some time. Don't try to just plug it in and play, because it's a little complex.
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, and I want to say as well, the default audio inputs in the matrix are set so that channel 1 and channel 2 are your analog inputs going straight through. And then I believe, I think by default it has 8 ends set in the matrix. And one of those is the full mix that you're creating in console going back to going to the computer's USB in. So if it is still set to default and you use some web conferencing applications, it may take all of those channels, the raw microphone plus the final mix of the console, and sum them together. And I believe Zoom does that by default, although now you are able to set specific audio channels in your audio interface within Zoom. I don't know about the other web conferencing platforms.
Coming up next, we'll be talking about the ATEM audio. We'll talk about dynamics and all the other advanced features inside of the ATEM mixers. Some quick announcements here. Tomorrow we're going to talk about the iPhone 15. So we were just talking about it a little bit, but what are the options? What are people using it for, both in still and video? What opportunities are now available to us with that phone? So we'll be talking about the iPhone. We'll be talking about some of the apps that we're using and really digging into it. So we'll be talking about that tomorrow. Joe DeMax from Central Control is going to be joining us on Friday. We're really excited to have Joe here. Saturday is, of course, 2 hours of Q&A. Sunday is introspection, when you ask questions about office hours. Sunday afternoon, we're going to have at 5 p.m. a soccer match, and we'll hopefully put some of that stuff into after hours. So stay tuned. So we were surprised at